At 0303, the basilica locked itself from the inside. That's not metaphor. The bronze doors shrugged off hydraulics, the bolts slid with the confidence of old soldiers, and the keyholes decided to be eyes. Somewhere in the nave, a clock no one had wound in a century coughed once and began to keep time at a pace that made the heart negotiate. My badge says Pontifical Swiss Guard, but the file in my pocket says something that doesn't translate. Security detail for a meeting that officially doesn't exist, scheduled every 100 years to remind God and his oldest enemy how to speak without using the world as a courtroom. They call it the Centenary Protocol. We use other names when we don't want to be overheard by walls. Walls over here anyway. Tonight they wanted to help. Rule 1. No miracles on Vatican soil. Rule 2. No blood. Rule 3. No names. We break all three every century, and the world keeps going because the basilica pays the bill afterward in quiet. I did my checks like ritual. The cameras blinked their compliance. The microphones confessed their cowardice. I salted thresholds with a priest's permission written on paper that looked like skin, but wasn't. The salt hissed on marble the way certain snakes do when they recognize a boot. The water in the fonts formed words and then thought better of it, erasing itself with polite shame. The Holy Father sleeps 2 courtyards away when he's allowed to sleep. My orders. Keep him unaware unless waking him saves the city. I've woken men for less. I let a pope sleep because tonight is a mathematics of risk. My partner tonight is a notary nobody trained me to salute. Gray suit, gray eyes, a rosary that refuses to shine. Her gloves look like they know the names of things that hate being named. She doesn't give me her name. I don't ask. Names are leashes. You run point on the north transept, she said, voice like a scalpel, the kind surgeons keep in cases that smell like leather and salt. If anyone tries a sign, you break it. If anyone bleeds, you make it not have happened. How? I asked out of habit, not ignorance. With this, she said, and put a brass seal in my pocket. It weighed as much as a small sin. It opens a door your training calls superstition. Where does it go? I asked. Up, she said. And only kings can fit. The floor of the nave is a book you read with your feet. Tonight it turned a page. Lines in ancient porphyry glowed dull red, tracing a circle the size of a choir loft. The circle wasn't closed. A narrow gap gaped like a tooth pulled on purpose. Around it, script that belonged to both heaven and hell, and neither. If you read it aloud, your mouth would forget vowels. Delegations arrive early when they mean to be offended. Heaven came as a hush that made my ears ring after. 4 figures in garments that refused to wrinkle. Their shadows didn't attach to their heels. They hung a centimeter above the floor, undecided. They walked like memory. Their faces were beautiful the way razors are beautiful, by doing exactly what they promised. Hell arrived thirsty. 3 figures in coats the color of habits left in rain. Their breath condensed backwards, steam drawing toward their mouths. They used reflections as doors, mirrors, polished bronze, the eye of a statue that felt embarrassed and looked away after. When they stepped onto the floor, the stone got heavier under them, as if gravity had found cousins. Gentlemen, the notary greeted without smiling. And whatever the appropriate honorific is for those who do not fall under gentlemen, observers only until the bell. The bell is older than the city. It hangs under the dome, no one admits it. It rings itself on nights like this, because no hand would feel clean after touching it. At 0313, time rearranges itself on protocol nights. It rang. Not loud. True. Dust rose from cornices like incense that remembered battle. I stood at the gap with the salt in one hand and the seal in the other. I am 6'2", and I have learned to be looked at by tourists and threats. Tonight I tried to be a door that cared. The first violation comes from heaven more often than not. Too much habit. An envoy raised 2 fingers that weren't blessing, light bent toward his nail beds like supplicants. The hair on my arms nodded like grain before a wind. I threw salt across the gap. It hissed. It did more than hiss. The granules hung in the air like beads on an invisible string and spelled no. Then they fell. The envoy's light folded back against his skin the way a dog returns to heel when it realizes the leash is loved. Rule 1, the notary said mildly. No miracles. We traveled far, the envoy said, and you could hear oceans learning manners in his voice. We will spill no light without purchase. Hell smiled with too many teeth you couldn't see, unless you permitted yourself to see them. We also have read the rules, their tallest replied. Her coat's collar crawled up her neck like something with We brought gifts. No gifts, I said. Observers until the oath. The guard speaks, another from hell said, amused. Does he know whose security he is? Mine, the notary said. They did not like that. We escorted them to chairs that had no arms because weapons happen in armrests. The basilica held its breath the way singers do before a difficult note. The floors had finished their lines and settled. The gap waited like a polite threat. My job was to stand in that breath and not choke. At 03:23, the Pope coughed in his sleep in the palace. The sound crossed courtyards like a blessing with bad knees. One of the heaven figures flinched, which is how you know they are not statues. Hell's tallest licked her lower lip while pretending to adjust her scarf. Predators love clocks. The oath is not spoken. It is remembered. The notary placed her right glove on the altar rail. The rail's wood darkened where her palm lay, absorbing a century and promising to keep it. The bell rang again, one tone lower, as if admitting an error it refused to specify. The first breach came from hell this century. A ring on a finger turned on its own, stone within stone, and the air tasted like hot pennies. The font nearest the south aisle bubbled. Water words formed, later. A drop bled down the bull's lip and fell, red as truth told too soon. No blood, I said, and I moved. Salt in one sweep, seal in the other, like a coin you avoid spending because it knows you. The drop hit the salt line and evaporated in a hiss that spelled mercy across my teeth. Incidental, the tall one said, a small sin packaged as etiquette. We are excited. Rule 2, the notary said. Do not be. The envoy who had tried to bend light earlier watched me with an expression angels must practice when they wish they could afford contempt. He carries something that does not belong to him, he said, meaning my seal. Everything belongs to us tonight, the notary said, because otherwise it belongs to the city, and she has no patience. At 03:33, the bell found its third note. The dome's inside surface crawled with gold that had no source. If you looked too long, you'd see script threading across it in both directions. I tried not to read. You breathe deeper when you're resisting, which is how protocols catch you off guard. A sound like a nail tapping glass came from the north transept. 1, 2, 3. The fourth was the sound of glass deciding to be water. The reliquary there, Saint Felicity, 7 suns in a row, flowed. The bones did not, which was the problem. Holy water refused to be holy and climbed out of its basin to spell don't on the marble. The letters held their shape. A child's palm print appeared in the O. Break it, the notary said. With what? I asked. Regret, she said. I stepped over the salt line I had drawn for myself. The floor grudged me. I put my hand over the word and remembered every door I hadn't opened for men who deserved rescue but needed a signature more. The letters fell flat, ashamed. The water calmed, went clear, and down. St. Felicity's glass reconsidered solidity and remembered itself. When I turned, 3 mirrors had appeared that weren't there before. One showed the nave empty. One showed it full of people who had never been born. One showed only me, holding the seal, but the seal's sigil in the mirror was different, a crown instead of a name. I looked away before I asked a question my mouth couldn't pay for. The oath finished in a silence that felt earned. Heaven and hell sat. The city exhaled. The bell decided to be a ceiling again. Names, the tall one from hell said pleasantly, as if ordering coffee. Rule 3, I said. No names. Then titles, she said. No titles, the notary replied. You will speak desire plain. Desires are uglier without nouns. Heaven wanted a clause about intercession rights at maritime borders, which meant ships and storms, and who gets to call a drowning a lesson. Hell wanted concessions around images and influence, screens, mirrors, eyes, and who gets to own the color red between midnight and 4. The city wanted them gone before dawn, without waking up with new architecture. At 04:04, time misbehaved on schedule. A small boy walked into the nave through a door that was locked. Bare feet, hair plastered to his forehead with dream sweat. He carried a folded scrap of ledger paper. The guards at the side aisles didn't see him because tonight is cruel to men who think steal is enough. He came to me. He held up the paper. "For you," he said in a voice children use when they've been taught to keep secrets that weigh more than bones. The paper smelled like an old vault. The writing was small and neat. "Conclude." The word bit my palm. Not heat. Authority. Across the nave, the tall one smiled without teeth. The envoy who had tried light looked offended at the paper's lack of gold leaf. "What is it?" the notary asked without leaning. "An attempt," I said, and folded it twice. Once along a crease that had been folded 100 years ago, and once along one that hadn't. "We're not done." "That depends," the tall one said, eyes on the gap in the circle on the floor. "On which door you keep open." The bell drew breath to ring again. The bell held its breath, and so did the city. Between tones you can hear masonry think. The boy stood at my knee with the ledger scrap burning authority into my palm, polite as a messenger trained by men who never had to run. Heaven looked at him like a symptom. Hell looked at him like a nephew. "Escort," the notary said. I took his hand. It was cool, not cold, and too steady for the hour. His pupils were wrong by a degree you'd only notice if you'd once watched a statue blink. I walked him to the narthex. The great doors were eyes again. They watched us with carved lids. I knelt to the boy's height. "Who sent you?" I asked. He shrugged like an adult. "The room," he said. "Which room?" I pressed. "All of them," he said, then added as an afterthought. "And the one under the floor that doesn't like being alone." "The gap," I said. He nodded, satisfied with my education, and slipped free without malice. He went out through a seam in the stone no seam belonged. I put salt across that seam because humility is not paranoia, and returned to the nave with the paper burning through pockets and cloth and into bone. Heaven had begun to bargain for rain. They do it every century. Ownership of weather is an old sin the world forgives because crops need drama. Hell countered with image rights between midnight and dawn, which is how mirrors learn to lie, and we learn to prefer them. The notary wrote nothing. Her glove lay on the altar rail like a flag. At 0444, the font nearest the chapel of the choir boiled, not bubbles. Eyes, flat, gold, lidless. They watched the gap because it was a hole, and holes are opportunities. I moved to throw salt, and the notary's hand touched my sleeve. "Wait," she said. "What do you keep open?" "My hands," I said, and she almost smiled. I threw the salt. The eyes blinked like coins disappointing a gambler and sank. The water wrote a final word, later, then went honest and flat as glass. From the pulpit, a voice spoke. No one stood there. The wood's grain arranged itself into a mouth and borrowed breath. "Do it quickly," it said, and I tasted wood dust that had learned Latin. The envoy from heaven glared at the pulpit like a father at a child speaking out of turn. The tall one from hell smothered a laugh under her collar. "Rule 4, there is no Rule 4, says, we do not listen when furniture prays." I listened anyway. It had the cadence of an old nun telling you not to marry the wrong vocation. The bell chose its fourth tone, and the gap warmed like metal placed by a fire. The script around the circle threaded brighter. I felt the seal grow heavy in my pocket. The notary glanced at me as if she'd heard my bone complain. She had. "If they push," she said, "you throw on the downbeat." "Which downbeat?" I asked. She didn't answer because the floor answered for her. The gap darkened, not with absence, with depth. A crown pressed the underside of the stone, points indenting reality. The air developed a flavor, iron, and a promise spoken too young. The tall one from hell inhaled like starving, and an envoy from heaven pretended not to reach toward his own shadow. "Now," the notary said. I threw. Salt hung in a ring where the gap wasn't yet open, and drew a boundary the way chalk draws a murder scene. The crown subsided by a half-breath. The points left bruises the stone would keep a century like thumbprints on a throat. I set my boot in the gap and my foot weighed more as if the floor thought I was a friend worth keeping. "Rule 1, I said aloud to remind the basilica, and no miracles. "Security," the tall one murmured approvingly. What a misused word. We got to the business that justifies keeping clocks. Heaven wanted to expand intercession in storms to include human-made seas, airports, highways, so they could claim miracles when pilots did math and still arrived. Hell wanted reciprocity, veto rights in paintings and screens when their images got used without consent. The notary told both to eat their adjectives and bring me nouns. They did. I kept the gap. The bell played a scale in stones. The boy's palm print bloomed in the marble where the water had once spelled, "Don't." I felt watched from below by something that had learned patience from winter. At 05:05, Rome woke enough to notice weather. A wind found windows that hadn't been opened since a pope who could still ride a horse. The candles lay low rather than dance. The frescoes looked down and chose not to contradict us. Then someone bled. Not much. A slip of skin on an envoy's knuckle as he reached for the paper he wasn't supposed to touch. A bead formed and refused humility. It grew as if taught by pride. It fell. The basilica lunged. I moved faster. Salt. Seal. The bead struck the line and spat like a cat refused milk. It tried to spell conclude in steam. My boot's heel came down and made it spell maybe. Rule 2, I said, voice even, breath full. No blood. The envoy looked offended at his own humanity. Incidental, he said through a jaw that had learned authority from being obeyed. Intent isn't the measure, the notary said. Outcome is. Opinions, Hell purred, pleased the way snakes are pleased when a bird lands near the right bush. We were almost to signatures you don't see when the clocks pulled one of their vices. All of them at once said 0303. That includes the ones without hands. The floor lines brightened. The gap pressed the crown against the world like a ring being sized with malice. He's early, the notary said. Who? I asked, which is a kindergarten question, and I was tired. The one who enforces the clause if you fail, she said. Not heaven. Not hell. The city. The basilica moved. Slowly, like a polite ship. The columns leaned a degree. The dome thought about being a jaw. The floor swelled into a blister around the gap. A lens in stone. Through it, I saw streets like veins and fountains like blinking eyes and catacombs like teeth in a joke only Masons understand. The city is not a metaphor when it comes to its own survival. A figure rose under the blister. Not up. Toward. A woman's outline. Then not a woman. A basilica wearing a person. Marble skin. Gold leaf veins. Eyes like rose windows at night. She put her palm against the stone from the underside. It bulged. Her handprint came up into our world in relief. 5 fingers, each with an apse. The print began to emerge. She'll take both delegations and grind them into hymnals, the notary said. And you. And me. How do we stop a city? I asked. Choose the right door to leave open, she said, smiling with terror's etiquette. So I left mine. I dropped the seal. I stepped into the ring with both feet and planted myself like a pew that had decided to be an... I took a breath big enough that it hurt in the place priests call conscience, and soldiers call ribs. Listen, I told the city. Please. It is impolite to say please to things older than your family. It works sometimes. The blister paused. The handprint stopped emerging a finger's width from air. The bell decided not to ring. Heaven spoke first, because that is their vice. We concede maritime claims for a century, the envoy said quickly, as if he could bribe a cathedral with competence. Hell second, because comedy is timing. We accept limits on image and influence until the bells next forget our names, the tall one said. The basilica breathed. The blister flattened by a degree. The handprint sank the thickness of a book of hours. What do you choose? The notary asked me without looking up. Your door? My certainty stays shut, I said. My obedience stays open. Acceptable, the city said through the and it sounded like a choir lifting a stone. The gap cooled. The crown ceased to bruise reality. The clock spat out 0304 as if embarrassed. Delegations exhaled in species-specific ways. The boy was standing by the pillar again. He nodded at me as if we shared an age. We were not done. The document appeared the way important documents appear, by pretending they'd been here all along. The notary placed it on the rail. The delegates extended hands that looked human from certain angles. The seal, she said to me. I bent to pick it up. It was no longer on the floor. Something had it. The seal was gone the way a word leaves your mouth and refuses to come back. I felt its absence like a tooth you worry with your tongue in the dark. The notary didn't look down. Eyes on the document, gloved hand steady, she said. Find it. Heaven pretended to be bored. Hell pretended to be patient. The boy was gone. The gap forgot to be interesting. The The basilica remembered how to be an obedient room and held its pose for a painter it despised. Who? I asked the floor, because that is where truth puddles on nights like this. The floor answered with dust, a trail of grit across the marble, thin as a pencil stroke, curving like a thought that enjoys being clever. It led not to a door, not to a window, but to a reliquary I had already made apologize. Saint Felicity. 7 sons. The glass had dried into honesty. The lock had decided to be old again. Open it, the tall one from hell suggested. Helpful like storms are helpful to sailors who love stories. Don't, the envoy from heaven said, chastising air. The notary's glove tapped the rail. Security decides, she said. I knelt at the reliquary and breathed on the seam. My breath should have fogged. It didn't. The glass warmed anyway, like a cheek. The lock offered a resistance that felt like ritual, not metal. I slid the pick we use for emergencies that have nothing to do with devils. The lock opened with a sigh priests make when they realize the homily worked. Inside, a bone and a paper I had not put there. The bone smiled its own dry smile. The paper said, Ask. Saints have bad senses of humor. Ask who? I said, not meaning to be that literal and unable to stop. Ask me, a voice said from behind my ear, small and pleased with its own echo. The boy. Bare feet black with dust that shouldn't exist on polished stone. He held the seal in both hands like an animal that bites only when you deserve honesty. His pupils were goat-slit again and didn't apologize. Who sent you? I said. The room. Which one? I pressed. This one, he said. He nodded toward the reliquary. She likes you. Saint Felicity, if you believe in continuities like that, had found a way to participate. The bone did not move. The glass did not cry. But the seal in the boy's hands hummed like a tuning fork when you strike it on a sermon. Give it, I said. Hand out. No, he said. Ask. Please, I said to the bone. The bone kept its sense of humor. The boy placed the seal in my palm. Heat went up my wrist. The sigil pressed a memory into skin, a crown, a gap. A door I had left open in a decade where I wore an easier uniform. Thank you, I said to the reliquary before I could be clever. The bone was the right kind of silent. The notary didn't look over. Signatures, she said, and delegation hands like goats in silk extended again. I lifted the seal, but my elbow stuttered at the wrong angle. The seal was heavier than it should be. The boy's grin told me that had been the point. Names, the tall one purred. No names, I returned, because rules are only rules when you can recite them without checking your notes. The document waited like bread before a mouth. I pressed the seal into wax that made a sound no wax should make. Grateful. The sigil impressed clean. The paper smelled like rain learning Latin. Heaven signed without moving fingers in ways hands move. Hell signed as if writing carved them out of flesh. Done, the notary said. And the bell tried to ring and thought better of showing off. Then the city changed its mind. You can feel a decision in brick. Weight shifts. Windows suddenly have expressions. Statues look everywhere at once and nowhere. The handprint under the floor pressed up again until its relief air kissed my boot. The basilica swallowed. The dome briefly became a throat. The Pope is awake, the envoy said, delighted and dismayed in equal measure. No one wakes him, the notary snapped, which is not a thing we can do to a pope, and we did it anyway because rooms decide before men. A door in the nave opened, though I did not unlock it. A man in white walked in with knees that remembered youth and forgave it. His eyes were the color of old paper with new ink. He carries more rooms than any building in Rome. He looked at heaven, and heaven remembered humility. He looked at hell, and hell remembered charm. He looked at me, and the seal grew lighter. Child, he said to the boy, which was both accurate and rude to whatever else he was. Do you know what you carry? Keys, the boy said, unabashed. To what people call doors when they're afraid to say mouths. The Pope nodded, wounded and pleased. Bring me the paper, he told the notary. She did. He didn't sign. He put his hand on it and said nothing, which on certain nights outranks signatures. The city subsided. The handprint sank back into stone like a saint deciding to appear only in parables. The dome forgot about swallowing and remembered how to shelter. We have 3 minutes, the notary whispered near my. Get them out before the city starts wanting a tip. Heaven left without turning backs. Hell left by looking into ringed fingers that were not mirrors and deciding to be elsewhere. The boy stayed. The Pope put a hand on my shoulder, and it was light. It weighed as much as my training and none of my certainty. "You did your work," he said. "I broke rules in the right order," I answered. "That's the work," he said, and smiled like a city you love when it stops trying to sell you something. We walked the nave like men checking to see if their house had learned a new creak. The gap cooled to polite. The salt on the floor had begun to spell something again. No word, just the beginning of a curve. I kicked it by accident and it decided to be innocent. Then a scream threaded the transept. Not a human scream. A violin string tight and aged snapping. The reliquary trembled. The bone grinned wider. Glass buckled without breaking. "Aftershock," the notary said, though she didn't believe her own lie. The boy looked at me. "She's angry," he said. "Who?" I asked. "The city's other hand," he said. "The one with knuckles." Marble rippled. A statue of a martyr lifted his palm, and the wound closed and then opened, and then closed again. Indecisive as a politician. The floor made a sound like an organ deciding to be a drum. "Evacuate," the Pope said gently, which is the difference between command and authority. We moved. The doors wanted to be eyes again, and I wanted them to be doors. My badge worked on one, the seal on another, the boy's grin on a third. Outside, Rome pretended dawn more confidently than it could afford. News would not cover this, because news is a hobby horses have of thinking they understand riders. At the last threshold, the floor caught my boot. Not clumsiness. Possession. Stone got soft and tried to hold my soul. The notary turned, glove already off, and slapped the threshold like a mother slaps a child who has forgotten its surname. "Mine," she said to the door. "Not yours." The stone let go with a sulk. We were in the square. Pigeons asked none of the right questions. The delegations were gone in the way smoke is gone and smell remains. The Pope put his hand on the boy's hair, and for a second, every clock in the city synced without malice. "Go," he told the boy, without making promises. The boy nodded. He vanished by deciding to be elsewhere, which is sorcery, and also how children survive. I should have slept for a week. I had 3 hours before the city remembered it could be a hand again. The notary walked me to the side gate and put the seal back in my palm. "It doesn't belong to me," I said. "It belongs to whoever knows how to use it without needing it," she said. "That's you for the rest of the day." I tucked it away like a thorn I intended to forget and fail. The Pope watched us with the expression certain statues wear at dusk. "Tonight," he said, "you will write the report no one will read and everyone will obey." "Yes, Holy Father." "And you will leave one door open," he added. "Which?" I asked, out of courtesy, not confusion. "Yours," he said, and smiled like an absolution. I slept like a stone in a pocket. Woke before I had earned it. Rome had decided to be forgiving about traffic. I shaved with a hand that remembered salt and a mirror that tried to show me crowning. I looked away. Mirrors never tire of being insulted. Report time. The office under the office, where corridors keep secrets in lockers that look like bookshelves. I wrote plain. Not names. Functions. Not miracles. Outcomes. I ended with this. We kept them from using us to end a story they started. I placed the page in a folder that older hands had annotated with the word bother in 3 languages. When I left, the boy sat on the step like a cat that intends to be invited and will leave if you move too fast. "Tonight," he said, "there's a second meeting." "We don't do seconds," I said. "Centuries are tidy." He grinned. "The city isn't." "Where?" I asked. "Because you ask. Because pretending you won't is arrogance." "Where churches go," he said, "and where buildings go when they decide they aren't buildings." "Catacombs," I said. "Worse," he said, delighted. "Basements." The bell that doesn't hang rang in my teeth. Basements are where churches keep their denied ideas. Catacombs are honest. Basements lie. The boy led me through corridors that dislike maps. The notary joined, uninvited. She carries permission like weather. We passed doors that practiced being walls. At 03:03 the lamps chose to buzz in a minor key, and the stone sweated as if the building had learned fever. "Why here?" I asked the boy. "Because you kept the right door open upstairs," he said. "And downstairs wants to see if you'll do it again." "What is downstairs?" I asked. The part of the city that eats conclusions, he said, cheerful as sin. The room waited behind a door that had been a cupboard until a minute ago. Inside, low ceiling, tables stamped with printer ink, chairs that understand bureaucracy. The floor had a scorch mark shaped like an accident report. Water climbed the walls in veins that spelled almost letters when you stared and refused to blink. In the center, the gap again, smaller, meaner, cut out of industrial tile and rimmed with brass that hated being common. Heaven arrived late and annoyed, which is how class reveals itself. Hell arrived early and hungry, which is how appetite survives empire. The city arrived as a draft that smelled like paper and ozone. Second meeting, the notary said, unrecorded, unforgiving. What do they want? I asked. Proof you can't give, she said. And mercy you will hate. Rule 1, no miracles. The ceiling dripped gold anyway. Rule 2, no blood. A filing cabinet coughed up a staple, and it pierced my thumb with a bureaucrat's malice. Rule 3, no names. The walls whispered mine, and I flinched because they were right. We began with the city. It spoke through big objects. The table hummed, the door swelled and shrank, the conduit rattled. Your upstairs decision stands, it said in the language of buildings. Upstairs ended a war for a century. Down here, you end a habit. What habit? Heaven asked, icy. Using this city as a stage when you lose your taste for honesty, the city said. This will no longer be a theater. You will learn to be bored where people live. Hell smiled like a lawyer recognizing a precedent. We accept boredom with conditions, the tallest said. Screens will still be ours between midnight and 4. Between 1 and 3, and her glove lay on a desk that hated her for how clean it became. 2 to 4, Hell tried. 1 to 2, she answered, unreasonable like saints. Deal, the city said impatient. Security. Always the knife lands back in my hand. Yes, I said. You left your door open, the city observed. Open it farther. My ribs remembered the upstairs blister. My palm remembered the seal. My mind remembered all the men I let through the wrong rooms because an order had a stamp. I took a breath like a diver. I told the honest truth. I can widen obedience. I can't widen certainty. The gap brightened. The brass warmed. Something under the industrial tile flexed. Not a crown this time. Teeth. Lots of them. City teeth. Rebar, rust, groundwater, phone lines, gossip. The gap wanted to do what cities do when you leave them alone with your wallet. Salt, the notary said. But not to me. To the boy. He stepped forward, bare feet unafraid of staples. He threw a pinch, not a ring. The salt hung in a net and dropped like a curtain. The teeth subsided, annoyed they'd been tricked with a kitchen trick. Upstairs, you ask nicely, the city said. Downstairs, you must say no. No, I told the gap, like a father who means it. You didn't mean it yet, the city said, almost kind. No, I said again, and let memory stab. One door, one night, one choice that cost a life more interesting than mine. No. The gap cooled. The brass spat a quiet curse in a language bolts learn in shipyards. The ceiling's gold drips turned to dust you don't apologize for. Heaven pushed their luck. They offered clauses about hospitals, trains, falling cities. Hell offered gentlemen's agreements on popes and monsters. The city rolled its metaphorical eyes and made a cabinet vomit a folder labeled "Bother" in handwriting that matched my file upstairs. You're done bargaining about people, the city said. Tonight you bargain about yourselves, what you are when the stage refuses you. Heaven removed a ring I had not seen and placed it on the table. No light, no tricks. Just a heavy circle that made the desk remember forests. We will wear humility, the envoy said, hating the taste of the word. Hell produced a key without teeth. It looked like a fingerbone metal had imitated and failed. We will knock, the tallest said, as if the verb cost her something she had not intended to spend. The boy looked at me. Your turn, he said. I'm security, I said, stalling. You're the door, the notary corrected. So I put the seal on the table and did not touch it. It hummed alone. The sigil lifted and hovered like a coin coerced by a magician you still want to like. The room tensed, expecting tricks. I refused. The sigil settled. The seal learned to be heavy without supervision. The city relaxed by a millimeter of wall. Acceptable, it said. Now we break a rule. Rule 1. No miracles. We would need one. The gap rolled. Not teeth. Not crown. A surface like water tried to climb into the air and failed politely. On it, a face formed, then another, then dozens. Not saints. Witnesses. Faces of people who had been used in past centuries to buy calm. Children sent with scraps of orders. Old men who signed papers that swallowed neighborhoods. Women who prayed in basements while empires made math with their sons. They looked at me because I was the only one here dumb enough to have a human job. You kept them safe upstairs by refusing theater, the city said. Down here, you will give theater to me once. Do what? I asked, and my throat was the size of regret. Summon, the city said. Call both delegations by names. No names, I said reflexively, like a child proud of memorization. Tonight, the city said, names are mercy. I will hold them. You will call them. Or the gap will chew someone you love. It knew how to aim. Who? I asked. The Holy Father, the boy said gently, which is worse than cruel. Heaven stiffened. Hell thrilled. The notary planted her glove and the desk smoked under it. Security, she said. Make the miracle you hate and break it with boredom. Names. I said them. Not aloud, not across the basilica, not into air that would carry and stain. I said them into the part of my chest where orders settle. I said the heaven names first. The old ones, the terrible ones. The ones that turn men into statues when they pretend to understand. I said the hell names second. The legal deviltries, the treaty titles, the pet names lovers give to danger. I said them without love and without contempt. The gap flowed over with syllables and hardened. The faces sank and smiled as they went, like swimmers who have decided to trust. The city tasted what I had spoken and did not spit it out. It kept. It stored. It made an archive out of my obedience. Enough, the notary said, voice thin from the effort it takes to keep rooms from wanting more. The gap cooled. The brass hissed. The room relaxed, as if prayer had become furniture again. Upstairs stands, the city said, formal. Downstairs ends. You will not convene here again. You will not use rooms to absolve you from being better. Go. Heaven disappeared like a page being turned. Hell dissolved like smoke reconsidering its loyalties. The city seeped back into conduit, and wall and the boy sat on the table and swung his feet like nothing had learned to bleed for us. The notary looked at me with eyes that had seen the world end twice and learned which endings deserved applause. You broke a rule, she said. Yes, I said. You'll write the report, she said. Yes, I said. You'll tell no one, she said. Yes, I said, and thought of the Pope awake, of the basilica upstairs pretending it had never bent, of the reliquary that liked me, of salt that spelled when no one looked. We left the basement by a door that will be a wall for 100 years. In the nave, dawn had the indecency to... The floor was a book again. The gap was a gap. The fonts were water. The bell had gone back to being an old bronze animal with good posture. The Pope sat in the front pew with his hands folded like a man who broke his own rules when young and forgave the right amount. The boy sat beside him, small and not. They were not speaking. They were listening to the city finish a thought. Report? The Pope asked me. We kept them bored, I said. God loves boredom, he said. It keeps the world. We walked together to the rail. The document lay where we had left it, signed by hands that pretend to be clean. I placed the seal on it one last time. The sigil sank deeper, a millimeter of certainty stamped into a century of noise. What door will you leave open? The Pope asked as if it were sunrise every day. Mine, and not too wide. He smiled because that was both courage and cowardice, and he liked the mix. Eat, he said. Then sleep, then write. We must always write what we will not publish. The boy tugged my sleeve. You want to see something? He asked. Mischief shaped like mercy. No, I said, and meant it. He laughed, delighted with my obedience to sanity. At 07:07 the basilica unlocked itself. We let tourists in. Cameras took pictures that would not show what happened because pictures are faithful to the wrong truths. A woman lit a candle for a son whose ship had turned back from a storm without anyone public taking credit. A man took off his cap without knowing why and cried once, then stared at the ceiling to pretend the tear had fallen from his eye, not risen. At 0808 in the office under the office, I wrote, "Every 100 years the Vatican hosts a meeting between heaven and hell." I was the Pope's security this time. Heaven asked for weather. Hell asked for eyes. The city asked for decency. We gave boredom. We kept them from turning us into theater. When the gap opened, we pressed salt into grammar. When the city wanted to bite, we said no twice. The boy delivered the note we always get. Conclude. We did not. We kept the right door open. Nothing exploded. That is a miracle. We will deny it. I signed nothing. I pressed no seal. I put the page in the folder named Bother. The cabinet swallowed it like communion. Outside, Rome pretended to be ordinary with such excellence it broke my heart. A bus hissed. Doves stole bread. The obelisk chose to be rock for another day. My phone buzzed with a message from a number that isn't a number. 3 words. See you next. I put the phone face down. I walked to the font. Water spelled a single letter and erased itself. S. Maybe for salt. Maybe for security. Maybe for stay. The boy's laughter came from no direction at all, and then from every door at once. The basilica breathed. So did I.